Okay, so this is the revision for the first part of water. How does water shortage impact people and countries? The content area that we'll be looking at is from page 148 to page 155. To look at the question in particular, we need to analyze it based on three sub-questions. Who is affected? Where is this location? And is it actually serious? We will be analyzing it from the domestic impact, the economic impact, as well as the political impact. Now, from a domestic point of view, when you are looking at water shortages, you are more or less looking at how it impacts the people in the home sphere. So problems like increasing difficulty in collecting water is a common domestic impact. Now, details include how many people lack safe access to drinking water, right? So in this case here, over 1 billion people don't have access to safe drinking water. Generally, it's from the less developed countries, where you have about 20% who don't. Most of these countries, water is actually used primarily for agriculture. So there are times where very little is actually left for domestic use. Another problem with being an LDC, a less developed country, is you do not have provisions that may help you tide over the drought situation where you have no rain for a prolonged period of time, sometimes up to 5 to 6 months, and it can cause your wells and ponds to dry up. So there's actually very little way for you as a resident to get access to clean water. What may that mean to you then? It means that you will have increased difficulty in collecting water, being very scarce. You may have to travel long distances to get access to water, and at times the water that you're accessing is not exactly clean water. So on the average, many African and Asian populations who are in less developed countries, they walk up to 6 kilometers to collect water on a daily basis, and they can only bring back as much as they can carry. Now, what can the governments do when you have such a problem? Domestically, one of the key tools that governments have used over time is water rationing. Now, Singapore is an example of having a country that has done water rationing before. In the 1960s, we actually had severe drought, and before we had our responses in place, we experienced a case where the government actually imposed water rationing. Okay, so what happened was people had to queue up for their daily usage of water during the exercise itself. Now, from an economic point of view, what can the impact of water shortage bring to you? You would experience reduced agricultural yields, means your agricultural production actually decreases. Now, the main reason for all this is because agriculture uses most of the world's freshwater supplies. So if your water supply actually drop, the amount of crop that you will produce will drop, and it may mean that some people die of starvation or suffer malnutrition. Further on to that, if you think that, oh, my country doesn't do agriculture, I'm pretty safe. In terms of industrial production, cost of producing goods will also increase. We have to bear in mind that fresh water is used by many industries for various purposes. One of the most common use of it is to cool machines down. So if you're looking at factories and production lines, actually you do have machines that run 24 hours a day. They generate a lot of heat, and so that to prevent it from self-destructing, what these machines need is actually fresh water constantly being pumped in to cool the machine down. So if you have water constraints because there's a drought situation, there's some problem with the water supply, the amount of money that the factories may have to pay for this water will increase. And so consequentially, the cost of industrial production will increase, and eventually it will hit you as the consumer because the price of goods that you're buying will increase as well. Another key use of water in the industrial world is for power generation. So once again, it's used for cooling the generators down. It has happened repeatedly in Europe and US. There were years where they were having very dry summers, and as a result, some of the power plants had to downplay their ability to produce energy because they just didn't have enough water to cool the generators. So rather than run the risk of the generators exploding, they had to tone down the production, and people had a power shortage. Now, this does not only refer to the general power that is produced by burning fossil fuels. Even in situations where you're using nuclear power, right, water is a very common coolant that is used in these power plants. So from 07 to 08, okay, several of the power plants in US had to shut down because they had a drought, and they were not able to use the same amount of water to maintain power supply. More directly, if you think about other industries which have a high reliance on water itself, things like the beverage industry. So you think about when you drink soft drinks, okay, things like Coca-Cola, your green tea, and you know, whatever you have, actually it requires more than the amount of drink that you have to produce it. So a liter of soft drink actually requires more than 1.5 times more water. Okay, it requires about 2.4 liters of water to produce. So you're going to increase water price. Now, politically, what are some of these impacts then? So imagine this on a local scale, right? When you have farmers who want to use water, you have factories who want to use water, there will be conflict between the farmers and the industrialists. Okay, it can be in terms of small scale conflict, it can be eventually up to a country level, a state level, and you have maybe conflict, you have protests and all this. And so these are political factors that may arise within a country. On a larger national global scale, when you are sharing a water source like the Mekong River, which runs across many countries, and one country decides to use more of it, the countries downstream will suffer as well. So you do tend to have this kind of issues, inter-country conflict, and within the country itself, sometimes different users, different stakeholders demanding different amounts and having conflict as well. Now I'll highlight one last thing. When we are looking at the case study of Mekong River, you have to understand that it starts in source in Tibet, okay, in the plateaus of Tibet, where with snow melt and all, it starts running down. It flows through China, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam before reaching the South China Sea. So it actually supports over 70 million people all across Southeast Asia, and China. So quite recently, the Laos proposal to build the hydropower dam over their part of the Mekong River actually caused a lot of trouble, a lot of conflict, and a lot of unhappiness in their neighboring countries who use the flow downstream. So countries like Cambodia and Vietnam in particular, right, because they are further downstream from Laos in terms of the Mekong River, if Laos were to dam up that Mekong River, they will experience much lower water flow. This lower water flow will affect things like your fisheries, your farmland, which use the fresh water from the Mekong River as a part of their inputs. So when you have countries sharing a resource like this, if you do not do a consultative approach, right, you don't ask one another about any sort of their opinion and just go ahead and do something like this, what's the most serious effect that could arise? You could go to war. Okay, we have not seen one over resources like this before, like water yet, but it's not impossible. So basically, this section of your water is dealing with conflicts and how it can impact different people and different countries. Hope this clarifies a little bit. For more details, you have to refer to page 148 to 155 of your textbook. Okay, thank you.